December 2014. Guy Haley published a short story called Wraithflight as part of the Black Library Advent Calendar. It follows Iyanna Arienal, Spiritseer of Iyanden, the most gifted psychic mind among the wraith-haunted survivors of a Craftworld that had already endured one catastrophic Tyranid assault. She leads a void strike against a tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan threatening an Imperial world. 15 worlds denied. The Norn-ships, the birthing organs of the tendril, destroyed. The swarm crippled. Before she orders the withdrawal, she looks into it. She extends her psychic second sight through the fleet and reaches the Hive Mind's soul directly. What she finds is immense. In Haley's text, she sees the great dragon's true form. A great shadow when seen from afar, a wave of dread and psychic blindness that preceded the Hive Fleet's arrival. But the greatest shadows are cast by the brightest lights, and seen closely, the soul of the Hive Mind shone brighter than any sun. She perceives the ridged topography of its mind, larger than star systems, an entity bigger than a god. It contemplated thoughts as large as continents and spun plans more complex than worlds. She concludes it isn't intelligent. Cunning, yes. Vast, undeniably. There was no thought to its doings, no intellect. It was cunning. It exhibited signs of an emergent mechanical intelligence, as evolution might appear to possess if sped to the rate of change the hive mind evinced. But there was no true intelligence to it. The hive mind was non-sentient. Satisfied, she prepares to withdraw. She has destroyed the tendril's birthing organs, denied 15 worlds to the great devourer, and confirmed her hypothesis. The Tyranids are a biological phenomenon, not a mind. She gives the order to leave the system and lets the weakened swarm take the human fleet she nominally came to assist. Then it looks back at her. She opened her second sense to find the dragon looking at her with terrible regard. For eons it seemed it held her gaze, and there was fury in that examination. The dragon was angry, and it was angry with her. Not with the galaxy, or this sector, or her species, but with her personally. What followed was a promise. Haley writes it in full. Her very being enslaved to its ends and used against others, her body rebuilt over and over again so that it might suffer the dragon's revenge. Not generalized hunger, a specific commitment directed at one spirit seer among the billions of psychic beings in the galaxy simultaneously available to the hive mind's attention. It had noticed Iyanna Arienal. It had filed her. Terror of a kind she couldn't have conceived flooded her mind. She screamed again, and this time every Eldar in the fleet screamed with her. Iyanna Arienal is one of the most sophisticated psychic minds alive. She examined the hive mind with the full precision of 10,000 years of Eldari psychic tradition and concluded it wasn't sentient. The hive mind demonstrated her error in the most unambiguous way available to it. It made this personal. Every faction in Warhammer 40,000 has an opinion on the Tyranids, how to fight them, how to slow them, how to survive them. Almost nobody asks the reverse. What does the hive mind think of everyone else? The codexes and the Black Library novels answer this across 40 years of Warhammer canon. The hive mind isn't mindless hunger. It's a calculating, psychically incomprehensible intelligence. And it has what can only be described as opinions. Some factions are food. Some are nuisances requiring arithmetic to dismiss. Some are problems demanding engineered solutions. And one, as Guy Haley's The Devastation of Baal makes explicit in omniscient narration, earned what the text calls hatred. A mindless swarm can't hate. Hatred requires memory, recognition, and a sustained fixation on a specific target's destruction that exceeds any resource calculation. The hive mind's hatred of the Blood Angels is the proof of its sentience, the most unsettling single fact in the 40K galaxy, and the one that reframes the entire Tyranid threat from a force of nature into something far worse, something personal. The nature of the thing. The standard picture, space locusts, mindless hunger, a biological storm with no more intent than weather, is wrong at the foundation. The hive mind is the Gestalt collective consciousness of the entire Tyranid species. Every organism, from the smallest microbe digesting matter in a bioship's processing chamber to the largest hive ship crossing the intergalactic void, is bound into a single, unified psychic entity. Not a network sharing information between individuals. There are no individuals. There is one consciousness experiencing the galaxy through billions of simultaneous sensory inputs, one will directing billions of bodies, one memory accumulating data from every engagement across every fleet in every system. The Tyranids Codex describes it as a supremely intelligent Gestalt consciousness that unites every creature from the smallest microorganism to the largest bioship. Every death, every wound, every tactical failure streams inward and is processed. The shadow in the warp is the visible consequence of that consciousness's scale. When a hive fleet closes on a system, the hive mind's psychic weight presses on the warp itself, disrupting astro-telepathic communication across light years, silencing the Astronomican's beacon, pushing human psychers toward madness. Iyanna's fleet felt it before they were anywhere near the Tyranid ships. Even the dead Eldari warriors piloting her wraithbone constructs, entities that feel nothing, stirred with something. The living crew's minds became, as Haley writes, as sluggish as those of the dead. That was the shadow of a tendril, a fragment. Its intelligence operates across timescales and at levels of simultaneous processing that make individual tactical reasoning look like one synapse in a vast brain. When a bioform assault fails, when artillery holds, when a choke point doesn't break, the hive mind registers the loss as data, not defeat. In the next wave, different organisms, hardened carapaces to absorb what stopped the first, tunneling forms to bypass what held, aerial bioforms to suppress what fired. Every tactical innovation encoded and answered before the enemy deploys it again. The 8th edition Tyranids Codex states this directly. Their ability to learn and adapt to the tactics of their prey accelerates as more hive fleets enter contact, because every engagement adds permanently to the collective's strategic database. The 3 great hive fleets that have struck the Imperium demonstrate this accumulated learning across decades. Hive Fleet Behemoth, which stripped the frontier world of Tyran in 745 M41 and drove toward Macragge in a direct, overwhelming frontal assault, was defeated. Chapter Master Marnius Calgar ground down the attack in a grinding campaign that cost both sides enormously. Behemoth was a hammer. It hit a wall and broke. Hive Fleet Kraken, devastating the eastern fringe around 993 M41, used a fundamentally different approach, dispersed, simultaneous multi-vector assaults across dozens of systems, preventing any single concentrated Imperial response from forming. Then Hive Fleet Leviathan, the largest the Imperium has ever recorded, entered the galaxy in 997 M41 from below the galactic plane, a direction no world had fortified against because every prior Tyranid threat had come from the eastern fringe. 3 fleets, 3 different strategic approaches, each one a direct evolutionary answer to what stopped the last. The Swarmlord illustrates this principle within a single organism. When killed in battle, it spawned anew, carrying all accumulated memories of every previous iteration. It does not start again. It continues, with data, having never forgotten who defeated it or how. That mechanism, perfect information retention across death, operating within the most sophisticated bioform the hive mind deploys, confirms that the collective memory reaches and holds everything that costs it something. The hive mind doesn't forget. It catalogs, and it adapts, and it returns. That is cognition, not instinct. And a mind that thinks also forms assessments. When it encounters different factions, those assessments differ dramatically. The Imperium, the Great Buffet. Humanity, from the hive mind's perspective, is the most important thing currently alive in the Milky Way. Not because humans fight unusually well, because there are trillions of them, distributed across tens of thousands of worlds, generating biomass at a density and breadth no other faction approaches. Hive worlds. Entire continents of living protein, billions of bodies packed onto a single planet, cities stacked to the atmospheric ceiling, represent exactly the target concentration that makes strategic sense at galactic scale. Beyond raw biomass, human psychers add a secondary harvest, genetic material encoding the capacity for warp interface, for psychic sensitivity, for abilities that standard biological evolution almost never produces. Astropaths, navigators, space marine librarians whose enhanced psychic architecture represents centuries of development. All of it recoverable, all of it useful. Hive Fleet Leviathan's advance toward Baal in the late 41st millennium wasn't a charge. It was a systematic stripping operation. Each world reduced in sequence, each system emptied, the fleet growing larger on what it consumed rather than smaller from the battles it fought. Inquisitor Fidus Krippmann watched the advance and understood its logic, so he attempted to starve it. He ordered exterminatus on populated Imperial worlds in Leviathan's path, killing billions of citizens specifically so the Tyranids couldn't consume them. Billions of people. Signed orders, inquisitorial seals, fleet deployments executed as policy, not metaphor. The Inquisition declared him a traitor and stripped him of his rank and title. He was also, by his calculation, choosing between those billions and the trillions behind them. The Hive Mind's strategic posture toward humanity is the posture of a predator toward its primary prey, systematic, patient, and adaptive. The Hemoth's defeat at Macragge became data. Kraken's disruption across the eastern fringe became data. Every Imperial tactical innovation, every defensive doctrine, every weapon system encountered across 3 major Tyrannic wars enters the collective and returns as a solved problem in the next engagement. Humanity as a species, despite its resistance, registers in the Hive Mind strategic calculus as an extraordinarily rich and widespread food source, and little else. Most of the Imperium, to the Hive Mind, is dinner. One chapter of Space Marines is something else entirely. The Orcs, useful friction. In 997 M41, with Hive Fleet Leviathan consuming Imperial space at an accelerating rate, Inquisitor Krippmann made the decision that defined the rest of his career. He captured Gene Stealers and placed them aboard a Space Hulk, directing it into the Octarius sector in the Ultima Segmentum. The Gene Stealer infestations broadcast the psychic beacon Hive Fleets follow. Tendrils of Leviathan diverted toward Octarius, toward one of the largest orc empires in the galaxy, ruled by an entity called the Overfiend. Krippmann intended mutual annihilation. 2 overwhelming forces locked in a sector-wide war, grinding each other to nothing while the Imperium rebuilt. What he didn't account for is what sustained war does to orcs. Orc biology is built for escalation. Constant, brutal combat drives physical growth, increases toughness, and draws more orcs from surrounding space, because there is no greater attractor in the orc cosmos than a fight large enough to generate its own legend. As the Octarius War ground through its opening years, war bosses and their warbands flooded into the sector from light years away. The orc forces grew larger and tougher on their diet of constant warfare. The Overfiend's empire, under this sustained evolutionary pressure, produced warriors more formidable than any engagement against standard Imperial forces could have generated. The Tyranids processed this and didn't falter. New bioforms emerged from the fleet's birthing chambers, specifically adapted to counter orc biology, a physiology notoriously difficult to kill permanently, capable of aggressive regeneration, sustained by a Gestalt psychic field that keeps greenskin technology functional in ways standard physics shouldn't allow. The Tyranids developed answers to all of it. Every orc that fell was rendered down for biomass. Every Tyranid that fell informed the next generation's design. The 5th edition Tyranids Codex records both sides escalating through the war, orcs growing larger and tougher, Tyranids producing more diverse bioforms, the pressure driving rapid improvement in both organisms simultaneously. The Swarm Lord eventually ended the Overfiend of Octarius in a decisive confrontation, and the Orc tide began to break. But both factions emerged from Octarius stronger than they entered it, and both are now pushing out of the sector, a development that has prompted the Imperium to establish a cordon around the region it's far from certain will hold. Cryptman designed a trap. The Tyranids converted it into something that functioned like a development program. Whether through deliberate recognition that the evolutionary pressure was strategically useful, or through the standard adaptive response the Hive Mind applies to every combat environment it's placed in. The distinction barely matters. Either the Hive Mind chose to exploit Octarius once it arrived, or it adapted so effectively to the conditions Cryptman created that the outcome is identical. A hive fleet emerged carrying new bioforms specifically designed to counter greenskin biology, funded by a surplus of orc biomass consumed across years of continuous war. The Hive Mind's perspective on the orcs is utilitarian in the most alien sense possible. They produce meaningful biomass. They breed fast enough to sustain prolonged attrition. Under the right conditions, the combat pressure they generate forces Tyranid bioforms to evolve faster than passive feeding would ever require. Their enthusiasm for the worst war in their species' living memory isn't a complication in this equation. It's the mechanism. Chaos, the contamination. When the Great Rift tore across the galaxy in the wake of Cadia's fall, the Hive Mind encountered something its evolutionary biology had no template for: an enemy it couldn't eat. Chaos demons have no biology. Their physical projections into reality are composed of raw warp energy given temporary form. Destroying a demon's manifestation does not kill it. The entity dissolves back into the immaterium, the psychic energy returning to the sea of chaos. No body, no genetic material, no biomass to harvest, no useful DNA to absorb, nothing to render down for the next generation of bioforms. A Tyranid assault force that kills 1,000 demons has expended biological fuel, lost bioforms, absorbed casualties, for a nutritional return of 0. On the cathedral world of Shadowbrink in 854.998.M41, during the Third Tyrannic War, Hive Fleet Leviathan attacked an Imperial world sitting at a focal point for demonic activity. Both Tyranid and demonic forces ravaged the planet. The 6th edition Tyranids Codex records Shadowbrink as devastated by both forces, with the Tyranids ultimately winning the engagement. But what they won against was an enemy that returns nothing, on a world whose biomass had been corrupted enough by demonic presence that significant portions of it were already beyond what Tyranid reclamation biology could process. Chaos didn't defeat the Hive Mind at Shadowbrink, it just denied it the meal. The Great Rift made this denial systemic. Entire sectors consumed by roiling warp energies. Planets swallowed by chaos incursions, inaccessible to feeding routes. Systems that had been productive feeding grounds, rendered sterile by demonic corruption. Chaos wasn't attacking the Tyranids directly. It was poisoning the galaxy the Tyranids intended to eat, denying vital biomass to hive fleets before they could reach it, sealing worlds behind warp storms that bioships can't safely navigate. The Hive Mind's response is described in the 8th edition Tyranids Codex as deliberate engineering. Hive Fleet Kronos appears to be the Hive Mind's first solution. Kronos splintered from Hive Fleet Leviathan in the era Indomitus and traces a coreward path along the line of the Great Rift. Its bioforms are built for one specific task. Demons prefer close combat, tearing, rending, overwhelming with bodies. Kronos is adapted for ranged engagement, with long-range bioweapons and psychic null zones that suppress the warp-based powers demons require to maintain physical coherence in reality. Where standard hive fleets carry the shadow and the warp as a byproduct of their psychic mass, Kronos can focus its shadow actively, using it to close warp rifts outright, denying demons their access to real space, and dispersing them before engagement even begins. The 8th edition Codex describes this capability explicitly. Kronos is well adapted to slaying its targets from afar, with an exceptionally powerful shadow in the warp that functions as an active suppression weapon rather than a passive phenomenon. This costs something. Kronos, in pursuit of chaos threats, sometimes leaves worlds only partly consumed, sacrificing biomass efficiency in order to seal warp rifts and remove contamination from feeding grounds that other Hive fleets will use later. The Hive Mind engineered a specialist force willing to accept reduced nutritional yield in exchange for eliminating the systemic threat to the broader harvest. A purely instinct-driven swarm consumes what is in front of it and moves on. The Hive Mind identified a systemic contamination, calculated the cost, and produced a specific biological countermeasure adapted to do exactly one job. The Hive Mind's view of chaos is the view of an immune system confronting a specific pathogen, not fear, not rivalry, a functional problem requiring a targeted biological response. Kronos is that response, engineered, deployed, running along the Great Rift's edge, closing what shouldn't be open. The Necrons, wrong material. The Necrons present a simpler equation, and the Hive Mind's response is the most purely mathematical of all its faction assessments. Necrodermis, the living metal composing every Necron warrior, vehicle, and edifice, can't be processed by Tyranid reclamation biology. No organic compounds, no DNA to absorb, no protein to render down, nothing that Norn queens can incorporate into new bioform templates. Destroying a Necron warrior produces wreckage, and Tyranid organisms that attempt to consume it sustain biological damage with zero nutritional return. Fighting a tomb world costs bioforms, costs biological fuel, costs time, and produces a net gain of nothing. The pattern across 40k lore is Tyranid fleets avoiding established Necron tomb worlds unless contact occurs by accident or incidental approach. This is arithmetic, not fear. An intelligence that processes all galactic consumption as a resource management problem at planetary scale doesn't dispatch limited bioforms to strip planets that return nothing when populated worlds with thousands of times the biomass exist elsewhere in the sector. The complication is Sarek, the Silent King, who returned from intergalactic exile with a strategic purpose that places the Necrons in direct conflict with the Tyranid agenda. Biotransference. The process that transferred Necron-tier consciousness into immortal metal bodies 60 million years ago requires reversal, and reversal requires living organic bodies. Total Tyranid consumption of the galaxy destroys every living organic body in it. The war between the Silent King's forces and the Tyranids is one of the hidden major conflicts of the current era, with Sarek actively opposing the Swarm for reasons that have nothing to do with territorial defense and everything to do with Necron survival. From the Hive Mind side of that conflict, the Necrons still register as interference in the resource model. Metal obstacles blocking access to the organic material behind them. The arithmetic hasn't changed. Wrong material, net negative engagement, redirect. The Necrons may be the galaxy's single most capable counter-Tyranid force, their living metal bodies impervious to the biological attrition that wins most Tyranid campaigns. But capability alone doesn't earn the Hive Mind's personal attention. What earns personal attention is something different, and the Necrons, however formidable, haven't earned it. A nuisance calculation. Move around. The Tau, barely a signal. The Tau Empire sits on the eastern fringe of the galaxy, roughly 6,000 years into what they consider a civilization. Their pulse weaponry is sophisticated. Their tactical doctrine is disciplined. Their capacity to incorporate allied species under the banner of the greater good has made them a consistent military threat to Imperial border worlds and a meaningful regional power. They generate almost no psychic presence in the warp. Tau souls produce negligible signatures in the immaterium. The shadow in the warp which drives human psychers to madness and brings Eldari seers to their knees, barely registers against a population with next to nothing there to suppress. The Hive Mind's primary detection and coordination architecture is psychic. It finds prey through psychic beacon signals, directs fleets through psychic communication, processes the galaxy through the warp-based consciousness of the Gestalt. The Tau are nearly invisible to all of this. Their armies can stand directly in front of a Tyranid fleet and fail to generate the kind of psychic pressure that draws the Hive Mind's focused attention. Hive Fleet Gorgon's campaign against the Tau demonstrates what happens when contact does occur. Gorgon's bioforms evolved with near-complete immunity to Tau pulse rifle fire within the campaign's active timeframe. Hormagaunts and termagaunts that had been stopped by pulse weaponry days earlier became effectively immune to it as the Hive Mind generated and deployed specific countermeasures in real time. The adaptive response was rapid and effective, but it came at a cost. The specialized bioforms built to counter Tau tactics were over-specialized, highly effective against the specific weapons and protocols of the Tau, less effective against broader opposition. The Hive Mind generated a precise answer to a specific question, and in doing so, narrowed the resulting organism's utility. The price of fighting a sufficiently alien adversary whose countermeasures don't generalize. The Tau believe they are a rising galactic power reshaping the Eastern Fringe under a universal philosophy. From the Hive Mind's perspective, they are a small, psychically dim cluster of worlds that registered enough resistance when directly contacted to warrant a targeted adaptive response, and then returned to background noise in the galactic feeding model. No personal opinions, no targeted fury, no spawned heralds, no disproportionate fleet deployments. The Tau aren't large enough, not costly enough, and not bright enough in the warp to rise above the category of regional adaptive challenge. When they become large enough, the categorization will update. The Hive Mind has time. The Eldari, what looks back? The Eldari are the most psychically sophisticated civilization currently active in the galaxy. Billions of years of recorded history, a culture structured so completely around psychic mastery that they built their civilization to move within the webway rather than trust the warp they understand better than anyone else. Their farseers can thread probability years ahead. Their spiritseers commune with the dead. Their greatest psychers can reach into the immaterium in ways that would destroy human minds in seconds. When they try to look into the Hive Mind, they are actually capable of looking. And when they look, the Hive Mind can look back. Craftworld Iyanden is what routine Tyranid attention does to even the Eldari. Once the greatest of the world ships, a moving civilization of millions, crossing the void in a vessel that was as much living library and garden as it was warship, the jewel of what the Eldari preserved after the fall. A tendril of Hive Fleet Kraken struck it around 993 M41. Not the full fleet, a tendril. What reached Iyanden reduced the population so severely that the survivors were forced to reanimate their dead in wraithbone constructs just to field an army large enough to defend what remained. Millennia of civilization permanently changed, irreplaceable souls lost by the millions, an entire culture hollowed out by a fragment of a fleet the Hive Mind wasn't paying particular attention to. That is what happens when the Hive Mind isn't looking. In Wraithflight, set in the aftermath of Iyanden's partial recovery, Iyanna leads her Void Strike and extends her psychic sight to examine the Hive Mind directly. Haley renders the experience in her terms. She sees a great shadow when seen from afar, but close, the soul of the Hive Mind shone brighter than any sun. She perceives something immense, thoughts as large as continents, plans more complex than worlds, a presence that extends through higher dimensions connecting to others, and then others again, until at a great confluence of the parts sat the terrible truth of the whole. She even allows herself a moment of wonder. She thinks, if only such a thing could be tamed, it would drive out she who thirsts forever. Then she dismisses it. She has seen cunning, mechanical adaptation, evolution imitating intelligence. There was no thought to its doings, no intellect. It was cunning. It exhibited signs of an emergent, mechanical intelligence, as evolution might appear to possess if sped to the rate of change the hive mind evinced. But there was no true intelligence to it. The hive mind was non-sentient. The battle goes well. The Norn-ships are destroyed. The swarm is crippled. Iyanna prepares to withdraw, satisfied. Something was wrong. A sensation at the back of her mind. The sensation grew teeth, became pain. Her soul was gripped by agony. Iyanna screamed, falling from the edge of the couch. She opened her second sense to find the dragon looking at her with terrible regard. For eons, it seemed, it held her gaze, and there was fury in that examination. The dragon was angry, and it was angry with her, not with the galaxy, or this sector, or her species, but with her personally. The promise that followed was specific. Her very being enslaved to its ends and used against others. Her body rebuilt over and over again so that it might suffer the dragon's revenge. Iyanna screamed. Every Eldari in the fleet screamed with her. The encounter is presented through her perception, the hive mind filtered through a Spiritseer's psychic framework and Eldari cultural metaphor. But the phenomenology is unambiguous. The hive mind registered Iyanna Arienal as an individual among the billions of psychic beings in the galaxy simultaneously available to its attention. It identified what she had just done to its tendril. It directed something at her specifically that Haley's text characterizes as fury and a personal commitment to her specific, prolonged suffering. The devastation of Baal later confirms that the hive mind's emotional states are unutterably alien, cocktails of feeling not even the subtle Eldari might decipher, treating the Eldari, the galaxy's apex psychic civilization, as the reference standard for emotional complexity, and then placing the hive mind above even that. The Eldari are the measuring stick. The hive mind exceeds the measuring stick. What the Eldari can feel is the targeting, the recognition. The hive mind doesn't merely eat Eldari when they appear in front of it. It notices certain Eldari. It marks them. And what Iyanna experienced confirmed that the hive mind's marking of a specific individual carries something that functions like personal investment in their specific fate. The Blood Angels, the proof. In 999 M41, the largest single concentration of Tyranid forces ever recorded converged on one target. Baal is a death world in the Red Scar, a region of space known for intensely radioactive suns, hostile desert environments, and sparse, brutalized human populations subsisting in resource-poor conditions. Baal has no hive world population density, no concentrated biomass, making it a strategically obvious target. By pure resource calculation, it should rank well down any hive fleet's priority list, a secondary world to be stripped after the more valuable systems nearby. Over 50,000 Tyranid bioships descended on the Baal system, the single largest concentration of Hive Fleet Leviathan ever assembled in one place, aimed at a desert world defended by space marines. The math doesn't work. The biomass return does not justify the strategic expenditure, unless something other than biomass is driving the calculation. Commander Dante had served as chapter master of the Blood Angels for the majority of 1,500 years. His eidetic memory, which should have made every decade of that span perfectly retrievable, had begun to fail under sheer duration, overwhelmed by the volume of battles and faces and names that a millennium and a half of command generates. He wore the death mask of Sanguinius almost constantly in public, feeling that he had become sanguineous in the popular imagination and now bore the weight of living up to an impossible legacy. He had personally ordered exterminatus on multiple Imperial worlds ahead of Leviathan's advance, killing billions of citizens to deny the fleet its fuel. He called himself no hero. Nearly 30,000 Astartes assembled at Baal, one of the largest gatherings of Space Marine forces since the Horus Heresy. The Blood Angels and their successor chapters drawn together for the final defense of their Primarch's homeworld. Their petitions for reinforcement went unanswered. The Cadian Gate had fallen. No help was coming. Multiple engagements between Blood Angels' forces and Leviathan tendrils had accumulated across years before the Baal assault. The Cryptus system campaign, defensive actions across the surrounding sector, each engagement a transaction the Hive Mind's collective memory recorded and retained. This chapter, these successors, this recurring obstacle that cost the fleet something. The Blood Angels didn't simply fight Tyranids the way thousands of Imperial units fight Tyranids. They hurt Leviathan specifically, repeatedly, in engagements that registered as sustained, costly interference rather than routine prey resistance. At some point in that accumulation, the accounting changed. To settle the Blood Angels' account, the Hive Mind deployed the Swarmlord. The Swarmlord isn't simply a powerful bioform among the many the Hive fleets produce. It's the herald of the Hive Mind, the creature that most directly embodies its specific will, possessing tactical intelligence that exceeds every other organism the swarm can spawn. When killed, it spawned anew carrying all memories of every previous iteration, every battle, every opponent, every strategy tested and refined and never forgotten. At Baal, the Swarmlord was spawned specifically to ensure the Blood Angels' demise, and it fought Dante directly. A space marine who had outlasted entire civilizations. A man carrying the weight of 1,500 years of command, who had ordered the deaths of billions and still couldn't call himself a hero. The battle consumed Baal. Approximately 100 Blood Angels proper remained in the final hours before the situation changed. Ironically, what preserved them in those moments was Kabanda, the bloodthirster of Khorne, the Blood Angels' most ancient demonic nemesis, who attacked the Tyranids at the critical moment for his own reasons. A Necron tier weapon called the Magna Vitrium was deployed. Gilliman's Indomitus Crusade arrived. Baal held. The novel records the aftermath. You have saved Baal from the Hive Mind, Commander Dante, and with it the greater part of this segmentum. Dante wept. I am no hero, he said. Now the proof. The Devastation of Baal is an official Games Workshop Black Library novel. It's omniscient narration, the voice that knows what the Hive Mind actually is, rather than what characters perceive it to be, states the following during the assault on Baal. The Hive Mind thought, it felt, it hated, and it desired. Its emotions were unutterably alien, cocktails of feeling not even the subtle Eldari might decipher. The same novel contains a separate passage. A character perceiving the Hive Mind from outside registers not malice, but hunger so deep and so complete that it makes his chapter's worst psychological affliction feel trivial by comparison. That is a subjective account, one finite consciousness trying to parse something incomprehensible through the only framework available to it. A character being overwhelmed by hunger so vast it reads as the absence of malice. The omniscient narration says something different. Thought, feeling, hatred, desire. In that sequence, in that order, attributed directly to the Hive Mind as its actual state. Hatred requires a specific cognitive infrastructure, memory of the entity being hated, recognition of that entity across time and circumstance, and a sustained orientation toward that entity's destruction that exceeds anything purely rational or resource-driven. The Blood Angels gave the Hive Mind all three. They heard it repeatedly across multiple engagements. They registered in a consciousness that processes all things as potential biomass, and they registered as something categorically different from food, something that needed to be addressed with the largest fleet concentration Leviathan ever assembled, for a planet whose biomass doesn't begin to justify the cost. That disproportionality is the signature. A swarm driven purely by resource logic pursues available biomass. What arrived at Baal was pursuing something else, something that required 50,000 bioships and the Hive Mind's personal herald deployed for one specific chapter on one specific desert world. The calculus doesn't produce that outcome unless something other than calculus is driving it. The passage notes that the Hive Mind's version of hatred is unutterably alien, emotions that are Cocktails of feeling not even the subtle Eldari might decipher. Its hatred may be colder than anything a human or Eldari would recognize as such, more patient, more absolute, capable of crossing decades and marshaling fleets and wading across the void to settle accounts with a chapter of space marines on a desert planet that wasn't worth the trip on any nutritional basis. That distinction isn't reassuring. It makes it worse. The closing question. 6 factions, 6 distinct postures from an intelligence that processes the entire galaxy simultaneously. Humanity is food, widespread, frequently resistant, perpetually cataloged and countered, generating the biomass that drives the Hive Fleet advance. The Orcs are an evolutionary tool, producing both raw material and adaptive pressure that Octarius converted from a designed trap into something functioning like a development program. Chaos is systemic contamination requiring engineered countermeasures, not prey, not rival, a disease requiring a specific biological cure. The Necrons are an arithmetic problem whose solution is avoidance. The Tau are barely a signal in the psychic architecture the Hive Mind uses to perceive the galaxy. Then there are the Blood Angels and Iyanna Arienal of Iyanden, who sit outside all other categories. The framing of respect is wrong for what the Hive Mind actually demonstrates toward them. Respect implies peer acknowledgement between parties that recognize each other as equals in some relevant dimension. The Hive Mind doesn't operate in that register. What it does is categorize, and the most terrifying promotion in its taxonomy isn't moving from prey to rival. It's moving from undifferentiated resource to named object of focused, specific, personal attention. Iyanna earned this. She crippled a tendril, denied 15 worlds, and the Hive Mind looked back at her specifically. One Spiritseer among billions of psychic beings in the galaxy, and registered something Haley characterizes as fury and a personal commitment to her specific suffering. The Blood Angels earned this across years of repeated, costly engagements that accumulated into something the Devastation of Baal's narration explicitly calls hatred. The Hive Mind assembled its largest fleet for their homeworld. It spawned its most sophisticated organism to end them specifically. It drove 50,000 bioships at a desert planet that doesn't repay the investment on any resource basis. Both cases share one structural feature. The Hive Mind stopped processing these as components of the galactic resource model and started processing them as specific named things requiring specific responses. That transition from object in the environment to target of focused intelligence is recognition. In the Hive Mind's taxonomy, recognition is the worst thing that can happen to you. It means the vast psychic weight of a consciousness processing the galaxy through billions of simultaneous inputs has carved out a dedicated space in which you specifically exist. Not as biomass, as something it wants dealt with. There is a grim and temporary comfort available to the factions the Hive Mind hasn't fully noticed. The Tau, near invisible in the warp, haven't yet warranted a personal categorization. Various Imperial worlds that haven't yet been in the path of a major fleet engagement exist only in the aggregate feeding model. For these factions, the Hive Mind's attention remains generalized and impersonal. They aren't yet named things. They are just food in waiting. The grim part. The Hive Mind's strategic horizon extends across the entirety of galactic consumption. Its patience operates on timescales that 6,000-year-old civilizations can't fully conceive. Every engagement is data. Every faction that resists long enough, costs enough, damages enough, will eventually register as more than background noise. The categorization will update. The Swarm Lord will be spawned for a new purpose. The 50,000 ships will have a new destination. Iyanna Arienal looked into the Hive Mind and decided it wasn't sentient. The Hive Mind looked back and made it personal. The Blood Angels fought it for years across the stars. The Hive Mind sent everything it had to a desert world because they kept winning. Mindless hunger doesn't remember who hurt it. Mindless hunger doesn't marshal the largest fleet concentration in a hive fleet's history for a planet whose biomass doesn't justify the cost. Mindless hunger doesn't spawn its most intelligent organism specifically to kill one chapter of Space Marines because that chapter has cost it something. The Hive Mind isn't hunger. It's something the galaxy has no adequate framework for, observed from outside. An alien intelligence capable of hatred, capable of recognition, capable of making something deeply, specifically, and enduringly personal. Across decades, across the void, across 50,000 ships converging on one desert world in the name of something that Iyanna Arienal insisted wasn't there. Recognition is what the Hive Mind offers when it has truly noticed you. The question worth asking isn't which faction it respects, it's which factions have managed to remain invisible, and how much longer that invisibility will last. Subscribe for more stories like this.